Okay, well, this is today. And today you have everybody here. This one.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We live in amazing times, and one of the most fascinating things about the time in which we live is that things that were considered science fiction not too long ago, we accept as an everyday thing. It happens all the time. When Jules Verne first wrote about nuclear-powered submarine, the Nautilus, in the 19th century, became a reality in the 20th century. And of course, the first nuclear sub was named the Nautilus. But many, many other scientific things, space travel and so forth. One of the areas is human reproduction. Creating a human being, scientifically or mechanically, where you don't involve pregnancy or gestation, but taking something and making a human being, whether it's cobbling together parts, like in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the original book, or just creating a human being through some type of magic formula. We have, the Gemara talks about the Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah is a fascinating book. It actually exists. I have a copy of it. I don't understand it, but I have a copy of it. And it's based on the premise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the universe with certain words, certain formulas, including how he created man. And certain rabbis who mastered this technique were able to create humanoids, people, I don't know what to call them. The very famous case of Rava and Rab Zera. They were good friends. And Rava sent, he created an individual. I won't call him human necessarily. Rava created an individual through the Sefer Yetzirah and sent it to Rab Zera to bring Shlach Manos, wherever it might have been. And Rab Zera wasn't too happy about it, and he destroyed it. All right. But the fact that he created it, and then other references to it in the Gemara, the Vilna Gaon is reputed from a reliable source to have created a golem when he was 12 years old. It's based on an introduction to another Kabbalistic text, Safradit's Niyusa, the hidden book, which I once looked up in the library because somebody mentioned it to me. And the only words I could figure out were chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. Other than that, I had no clue what it was talking about. But the introduction to this Kabbalistic text was written by the author of the Torah Temimah, and he records that the Vilna Gaon made a golem. Now, a golem is a humanoid. It's not a human, not a person, really. But it was an individual that was animated somehow. So the question comes down, today, in modern technology, ever since they first cloned a sheep, Dolly, about 25 years ago, they can now create, and I'm sure it's being done in secret laboratories all over the world. It's not legal. Most countries prohibit human cloning.
Wally,
Yes.
let me interrupt you just 1 minute. Are we to believe that these creations, golem and so forth, are true?
Yeah, I think so. We have in the 18th, 19th century, the Chacham Tzvi. The Chacham Tzvi was the father of Yaakov Emden. And he has in his Chuvos a fascinating question. There was a community somewhere out in the hinterlands that only had 9 people. and needed a tenth for a minion. So they asked him, Ashayla, if we create a golem, can that person be counted in the minion? Now, the fact that they asked the question obviously implied that there were individuals who could do this. And he replies, he took the question seriously, and he said, no, you can't count the person in the minion because that person is not a person. A person is defined as somebody who was born of a mother after a period of gestation as a result of relations between a husband and a wife. Woman gets pregnant, she carries a baby and gives birth to a baby. That is a human being. Anything other than that is not necessarily considered human per se. However,
if these golems were real and we're supposed to believe them, how come there's no history of it? There's nothing mentioned. Whatever happened to the golem?
well, if you go to the Altneu synagogue in Prague, there was a famous golem that the Marshal created to protect the Jewish community from anti-Semitism, and he created this golem, and then eventually he buried it, or he entombed it in the attic of the synagogue in Prague. Supposedly he's still there, although the access to that attic is now sealed. But there's instances in history where there was a golem that was created to protect the Jewish community. But putting that aside for the moment, and we can give a separate class on the history of golems. Modern technology today can create from human tissue, and this is where the big problem comes in. You take human tissue, and from that human tissue, you can ultimately create a full person. With all time. Well, that's, again, up until now, a person is defined as human coming from something that was human initially. Whether it was an egg and sperm is one thing, but here you have human tissue. An actual human being, a tissue wherever it came from in his body, but it's a human tissue, it's human. So the question is asked, is that human tissue is used to create a person considered human? Is it appropriate to do this? And that's where we're going to start. The Torah says in Parshas Bereishis, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Chav Ches, Hashem created Adam and Chava. V'amar lehem Elohim, Peru urevu umilu es haaretz v'kivshuha. Right, be fruitful and multiply, and what's the English translation here? Fill the earth and subdue it, conquer it. Do what you have. You are now the dominant force in the world. Go and do whatever you have to do to participate in my creation. Subdue the earth. Do it. Master the earth. Even better. Thank you. Redu bidgas hayam, and rule over the fish and the birds and etc. and all living things that creeps on the earth. So the question is, does the creation of a human being, of cloning a human being, is that within the context of kivshuha, of mastering the earth? Is it an appropriate exercise of our mandate from a God to conquer the world? Or is it an inappropriate intrusion into the world order? In other words, this is not normal. A child is born from the union of a mother and a father. That's a human being. That's how you create a human being. Creating a human being in a test tube, is that creation considered a full human being, as you asked, or not? Even though the origin might be human tissue. The Rav, in one of his essays, doesn't deal with the cloning issue, but he does say that part of our legitimate mandate of conquering the world would include space exploration. That's part of creating he expands the world to include universe. And there are poskim on both sides of the issue. There are poskim who vehemently oppose human cloning, and there are others who say, under certain circumstances, and here's the key, under certain therapeutic circumstances, if this is the only possible way that a woman could have a child, it might quote unquote, be permissible. But this is the whole machlokas among Gedolei HaPoskim today.
I don't think they ever said cloning. They said IVF and all that.
Oh, no, they've gone into cloning now. They've gone into cloning. The Meiri, and the earliest comment that we have been able to find, the Meiri says that you can permit the creation of creatures, I don't know how to put it, and it's through non-sexual means, because, and it said it's not considered kishuf, it's not considered sorcery or magic to do this. And this is already in the 13th century that he writes about this. Yeah.
Wasn't there somebody who created a cat every week of Shabbos?
Yeah, the
And
Gemara.
they said that it didn't need shmita.
Correct,
So
because
that
it was,
means that anything created artificially is not real.
it's not, well, it's real because they ate veal for every Shabbos. They liked veal, so they created a calf with Sefer Yetzirah. The same way they that Rava created a golem from Sefer Yetzirah, they can create a calf. And
The human created, artificial things would not be considered.
I mean,
If the calf didn't need shmita.
well, the calf doesn't require shkita because it's not, born in the normal way. Correct, but the fact remains that the concept of creating stuff asexually or in a not normal way existed in the Middle Ages and even in the Gemara. Yeah.
My son is an embryo adoption. That means it's not my sperm, it's not my wife's egg, it's an embryo adoption.
Okay.
Someone had IVF.
Yeah, okay.
My wife carried him, and he was born by C-section, but my wife carried him. So the school he goes to charges his full tuition. They don't ask him that it's anything artificial.
No. Again, IVF and those type of things, and all types of assisted types of pregnancies. That's a little different category. It's a little bit different because you're taking sperm.
It was you.
You're taking human sperm and you're introducing it into, that is different than cloning. Cloning takes a human tissue from certain parts of the body and it put it in some type of a medium or a solution, and basically it grows. And as it grows, it forms different. Now, again, I am willing to bet money that this exists and people have produced some type of creatures, and who knows what they look like, and then they destroyed them after a period of time because they didn't come out normal, but they're working on it. And if you remember, a number of years ago, there was a book made into a movie called The Boys from Brazil, okay, where Dr. Mengele cloned Adolf Hitler, and the little Hitlers all over the world, little boys growing up like Adolf Hitler, to Nazi shall rise again. But that concept exists. The Torah, first of all, would put, assuming under certain circumstances, even if you assume that certain types of cloning might be permissible, and we'll get to that in a moment, it would definitely be prohibited, for example, to use cloning to develop an army of super soldiers. That would be prohibited. To create a group of super athletes. That would be clearly prohibited because that serves no acceptable purpose. I'm not, the sports fans would say, yeah, go for it. But halakhically and legally, even in those countries that prohibit cloning, for example, Israel prohibits reproductive cloning except for therapeutic purposes. They would allow it under certain circumstances. If this is the only possible way that a woman can carry a child or develop a child, maybe there are poskim that would allow that. But you have poskim on both sides of the issue. And is a clone, the question that was asked before, given that it comes from human tissue, is it considered human? even though it may have been produced in a test tube, and even though it was basically a chemical infusion that allows this cell to grow and multiply and become eventually into a human being. Now, cloning has also been done already. For example, they can clone certain organs. So there's a shortage of livers for liver transplants or lung transplants. They can clone a liver, they can clone a lung, and under halachic standards, there are many poskim who would say for these type of therapeutic purposes that would be permitted, but it's not so clear. Science and halacha, are still at loggerheads with each other in terms of agreeing on what's permissible and what isn't permissible. How do you define humanity? How do you define creation? How do you define a human being? A human being, according to many poskim, is produced the normal way. Husband and a wife have relations, the sperm fertilizes the egg, and a child is carried, gestated for 9 months, and the mother gives birth. That's a human being. Human beings do not grow in test tubes. It's interesting because Rabbi Tendler Zatzal was one of those who permitted cloning, yet he also weighed in on the whole issue of in vitro fertilization. There are many questions that were raised there in terms of adultery and other types of things. Who's the real parent? A lot of interesting questions about in vitro fertilization. And I remember I was in class when he said this. He says, you can't commit adultery with a pipette. A pipette is the long glass tube that you use to add drops of this. You can't commit adultery with a pipette. So that issue was put to rest. But on the same token, he was in favor of therapeutic cloning when the need would arise. There are a lot of different commentaries in poskim that talk about how do you define humanity, what makes a person, what makes you part of a species. And the Gemara has pressed, again, the beauty of the halachic system is the ability of Gedolei HaPoskim to find a source within our halachic literature that deals with almost anything. And you have phenomenal Gemaras. How do you define a horse? A horse is defined as being born of another horse. And it talks about that in the Gemara, in Bechoros, because animals can sometimes give birth to animals that don't look like the mother, just like human beings, because there are some very gross, I guess what's what I'm looking for. There are horrible, misshapen people that are sometimes born that don't look human, let's put it that way. And there are situations like that. You could have a child being born that looks more like an animal than a child. And whether that child can survive is another story. But Rav Bleich, for example, argues that this principle in Bechoros, that if you're born of a horse, you are a horse. Accordingly, a clone is human because it was created from human source, from human tissues. And the fundamental difference between a golem and a clone is that the clone is a product of human agency, of a human being, whereas, and a clone, even though it's human agency, there's something, I don't know, divine because it comes from human tissue. You can't create a person from a different type of species. It wouldn't be a person. It might be a horse. It might be, and messing with Mother Nature, to use a popular expression, is not something that Torah encourages or allows. For example, why is there a prohibition against kilayim? Why can't you plant different seeds in the same plot? Why can't you mix two different animals together? Because that's a disruption of the natural order. Grapes should be grown in a vineyard, an apple should be grown in an apple tree, and you can't mix the two. You can't mix oats and you can't mix barley in the same field. You don't interrupt the natural order of things. Now, is cloning an interruption or a disruption of the natural order? And this is what they argue about. Normally, father and a mother contribute. That's how a child is born. Interestingly, again, in vitro fertilization is not quite the same. There are a lot of fascinating questions about, who is the father and who is the mother. It's a separate shiur all by itself, but clearly it's not the same as cloning, because cloning is a totally different process. And is cloning interfering with nature to the extent that it would not be allowed? Yeah.
If somebody does do cloning, you're allowed to benefit from it.
Yes. Yes.
So, that would seem to indicate that if somebody creates a human, it is something.
Well, again, that's why you have two different opinions on this subject. If you clone a horse and a donkey, you get a mule. And mules are very useful. They're stronger than donkeys. They're not as big as horses, but they're stronger than, and mules are used all over the world. But it's the fruit that we eat, that is a hybrid of other types of fruits, seedless oranges, tangerines, all kinds of other fruits that we normally, now we can't clone two different, but we can certainly eat the result of it.
Wally,
Yes.
are we allowed to take advantage, say, of a mule? Because
Yes. Yes.
we are?
Yes.
Because, but as you said, it's a mix. And I know that when David uses a mule, he brings Shlomo to his coronation on his mule. So
And Mashiach will come.
It's a mixed animal.
Again, you can't actively participate in the creation of that animal, but you can benefit from it. That's one of the interesting thoughts of halakha.
So
Yes,
in other
Abe.
words, if you wanted to make a mule and you put the horse and the donkey in the same stable or something like that, and they somehow got together, is that what you're saying? Something like that?
As long as you didn't put them together for that purpose.
Well, I just put them together. But
What was your goal?
How do you tell the difference there? It's
Well,
almost
that's why-
impossible.
That's
Put
why
them
they're,
there.
that's why they're,
What else do they expect them to do?
that's why they're kept in separate stables. Yes, Abe.
So how do you make them then?
You don't, somebody else does. I'm
I
not telling you. So if someone else did it, you can benefit from it. That's the halacha. Yes,
The
Abe.
whole idea of cloning is for nefarious purposes. Either you want to clone a racehorse, or people want to clone a lost child. It's only done, or somebody wants to clone a lost spouse. It's only done for nefarious purposes or for highly questionable immorals. It's not done to help society. Yes, there is stem cell research to build an organ, but no one advocates cloning a human being for altruistic purposes.
Correct, but for therapeutic purposes, it's, again, creating organs for therapeutic purposes is a much easier sell than creating human beings.
Sure, and that's not a matter of cloning.
But theoretically, and we're not at that stage yet, although I'm sure it's going on someplace in the world. If for whatever medical reason, the only way for a family to have a child is cloning, there are those who might be lenient. Now, again, there's always adoption. There's always, but what if in vitro doesn't work? And what if there are no Jewish children available to adopt? Adoption agencies used to do a big business until birth control pills came around. And then most of the adoption agencies closed up because there were no children to adopt. Because there are obviously children born out of wedlock who are given up for adoption very, very quickly. But orphanages as such There are very few. There used to be a Jewish orphan home in Newark until shortly after World War II. And after, I say, by the 1950s, they closed up shop. The only reason I know about it is because they had a lot of money, which was put aside for the purposes was to help children, whatever that meant. And I used that, and I contacted them and I said, I have a project that I want to help children with. Can I get some money? And they gave me money. We had a huge program for, I think one of the first programs of psychological counseling and guidance in a day school, where we used the services of a Jewish family service in an Orthodox day school to provide services. And that was funded by what used to be the orphanage in Newark, because they had a lot of money left over. So we got a grant for that. But clearly, Abe is correct that cloning humans per se, most people would be opposed to, because it's usually being done for nefarious purposes. However, for therapeutic purposes, and if there is no other way possible for a woman to have a child for whatever reason, it might be permissible. But theoretically, you have two schools of thought. There are those who are opposed to it as being interfering with the natural order of things. A child is born the natural way, doing what comes naturally, as opposed to those who would say it's part of the mandate of conquering the world and mastering the world and utilizing whatever scientific discoveries are out there. But I am sure that in laboratories, secret laboratories, whether it's in China or Korea or so the Soviet Union, they have created human beings in a test tube. Probably didn't go very, very far. They destroyed it after a couple of months because it didn't come out right, quote unquote. At some point, it's going to happen. And at some point, this area of science fiction is going to become a reality like everything else, and we'll have to contend with it. I am sure there will be a market for sports, for military purposes, for other reasons. Again, there was a movie a while, I forget the name of it, where people were cloning organs, just organs. There was an organ farm, and they were selling on the black market. They were cloning organs, and they had them hanging. Like if you go into the freezer in a butcher shop, they had all these organs just hanging that they had cloned. You need a kidney, you need a liver, you need a lung. You know, the price is right, you can get one. But that's becoming more and more of a reality today. The scientific technology is available, and very soon the technology for human cloning will be perfected. The same way that they can create sheep and pigs via cloning. Human cloning is not very far down the road. And again, is this acceptable or not? And we'll see. Again, the objection to the natural order is based on the objection in the Torah to mixing different seeds, kilayim. You don't mix seeds because that's not the natural order of things. Corn is supposed to be corn. Sorry?
The clonus horror movie.
Yeah.
The movie deals with the topic of cloning humans for the purpose of harvesting organs for transplant.
Okay. So movies are a precursor to reality very often in science fiction. But the kilayim is prohibited because it's interfering with the natural order. You want to grow corn, you grow corn. Now, you want to genetically modify the corn to be better corn, that might be a different question. But to take corn and make peas out of it, or a combination of that's going against the way God created the world. Yeah.
To say that it's not going to happen would be very scientifically naive, because they've already cloned mice.
Yeah.
And that's a mammal. And it's naive to believe that it's not being experimented on.
It's 100% being experimented on. It's not, and it's happening. And the question is, at one point, it'll emerge from the shadows I'm afraid it's gonna be sooner than later. Anyway, it's something to chew on, something to think about, but the fiction, or the theoretical is now reality. And,
Wally,
the halacha has to deal with it. Yes,
if Israel needed men in the future for an army to defend itself,
yes.
would it be allowable to clone for
Well,
that purpose?
Can you create Supermen to form an army to defend yourself or defend the country? This is one of the theoretical uses of cloning. And this is something that the halacha would be opposed to. And again, most countries that prohibit human cloning allow it for therapeutic purposes. I don't think therapeutic purposes would include creating a super army. There have been movies made about that as well. But halachically, this would not be something that would be encouraged for sure, and I don't think it would be allowed either. But
So Wally, if somebody made, say, improved corn and they made maize like the Indians did, can you use their seed after and make more maize? Is that allowed? Or?
Well, if somebody made better corn, can you use those seeds to
maize is corn.
Maize is corn, correct.
Right,
If
and
somebody
they improved on it. Can you use the seed?
Well, we eat genetically modified products all the time, whether you realize it or not. So genetically modified corn is not the same as mixing corn and peas. Right? If somebody developed a corn on the cob made out of peas, that might be problematic. But again, the Isur is on doing kilayim, not necessarily benefiting from kilayim.
So the improved seeds I can use. In other words, if I get better strawberries and then put them in a seed and I plant them in my backyard, I can use them.
Yes.
I can plant them.
Yes.
That's the question.
If somebody already developed it, yes. Okay.
How about grits?
I'm sorry?
How about grits?
Grits. Not having been in the South, I can't talk about grits, but I guess you can be the authority on that, Nathan. I don't know.
Okay.
Genetically modified grits, I haven't seen that anywhere.
We need someone to bench.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Be well. Thank you, Wally.
Thank you, Wally.
Got a bagel?
So it's your so you bench. It's your yard site. Hey.
Rabbi Said Baray.
Hishem and Baruch Yatov Yadalam. Baruch Shechal Mishlot V'Chayinu. Who knows? Say lechem kol b'sakim.
So, Yeshua not to my part, so the top of their own behind the shop. Also, my husband.
Amen. Yep.
Someone gets back to somebody in shop, it puts the light on. So you can use the light as a same.
Yeah, similar.
Similar.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, is a misnomer. Because he's not a real person.
But what you're raising is a much more basic philosophical question. If Adam was not human in the halakha definition of human, and all of mankind, I mean, but his descendants were.
Right.
But he was not the first, he was the first person, not necessarily the first human, 100%.
Beautiful picture. Oh, thank you. Oh, okay.
15 years.
All right, let it go. Do you want to write back? Nope, I'm good. Thank you. All right, don't forget this. All right, let it go. Off and running. Okay. Take it easy, everybody. Have a good one. Lovely. Yep. I hope it's not raining. Yeah. All right, Lindsay. End meeting. Where? I don't see it. Stop video. First. Okay. And there you go.